Once, there was a giant called Grum. Now, you may not think that giants exist, but they do. It's just that hundreds of years ago, human beings made an agreement with the giants that humans would have all the small, crowded, soft places, and that giants would have all the huge, empty, hard places. And that way, they wouldn't disturb each other, because humans and giants don't really get on, for obvious reasons. And giant land is bordered. If you ever tried to get there, you would find huge trees and mountains in your way. You wouldn't even know they were barriers, but you'd never be able to get to giant land. Anyway, the giant Grum was bored of giant land and wanted to go and explore human territory. He thought to himself, there must be something a bit more interesting than boring old giant land. There must be more important things than just hard rocks and empty spaces. I'd better go and explore human land. And so, that's exactly what Grum did. He went to explore human land. He stepped over the very tall trees and mountains with his huge boots, stamping away until he got to human land. Now, Grum wasn't a bad giant. He was actually pretty decent, but he was very big and very clumsy. And giants are normally quite clumsy because they have huge hands and huge toes. And Grum was considered clumsy even for a giant, which is very, very clumsy indeed. So he was wandering around human land. He didn't see much for a while, just some trees and some sheep and some cows. But then he smelled an interesting smell on the air, and he thought it was porridge, because it smelled like oats. And he loved porridge, so he followed the smell until he reached a town. Now, Grum didn't know it, but he'd got to the town of Brew. And Brew was famous because it made the best beer in the world. They had the best water and the best hops, and the townsfolk knew how to brew a good pint of beer. Now, the townspeople of Brew were not particularly happy to see Grum because he was very big and clumsy and his feet were in their ponds. But it pays to be nice to someone who's 50 foot tall, and so everyone rolled out to welcome him, including the mayor, Mr. Bass, who offered his hand up to Grum's little finger. Well, Grum was very thirsty after his long walk, and so he asked for a drink. And of course, the townsfolk offered him beer. They got the biggest barrel of beer they had and gave it to him. But even the biggest barrel wasn't big enough for Grum. He broke it between his thumb and forefinger, splintering the wood and letting all the beer trickle down to the floor. And so they came up with a plan together. They brought him 10 to the dozen huge iron sheets and made him a hammer out of 2 tree trunks, one big long one and one short stumpy one, which they put together to make a hammer. And Grum hammered with his giant tree hammer, clank, 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 all night until he'd made tall cylinders as big as houses with little tops on. The townspeople filled them all with beer and left it to brew for 3 days and 3 nights. And in 3 days and 3 nights, they organised a big game of cricket on the county lawn, which they invited Grum to so he could enjoy finally his glass of beer. Now, the thing about giants is they don't usually drink beer. They're teetotal as a rule, and they drink their water fresh from brooks and streams. Occasionally they'll get a duvet-sized bag of herbs and put it in a hot spring to make a sort of soupy tea, but nothing stronger than that, and certainly never beer. So when Grum tasted it, he went, "Oh, no, it's a bit bitter." "Well, that's sort of the idea," said Mr. Bass the mayor. "It's bitter." "OK then." Grum didn't really know why anyone would make a drink bitter, but he enjoyed the way the beer made him feel. It's all sleepy and snoozy and happy. And he got even more clumsy than usual, bringing his giant fist down in the middle of the county cricket ground and quite spoiling the game. They tried to act not terribly upset, but they all made their polite goodbyes and went back to the town. And Grum decided it was about time for a snooze, so he lay down. And as the alcohol coursed through his giant veins, he tossed and turned in his sleep, and he tossed this way and he turned that way, and he moved so much that when he woke up, what had been a flat plain was a valley. And so Grum crawled out with a terrible hangover. He had an aching head, a burning tummy, and his eyes were all crossed and blurry. And he thought to himself,
"Oh, if this is what they get up to in human land, I'm going right back to giant land."
And so he staggered on across human land, and stepped over, back into giant land, where he collapsed, and slept for 3 more days. Well, the people of Brew were quite happy to see Grum leave, but they still wanted to keep the iron towers that he'd made. And they brewed a new beer in the giant's honour, called Grum's Downfall. And when it was finally made, they proudly announced on the label, "This beer can floor a giant."